The client who asked me to refinish these nightstands loved everything about them. The size, the shape, the fact that they're made of solid wood, well, almost. And you can probably guess what she wanted to change. Yep, the color. And the hardware could go too. These nightstands are a typical example of 90s furniture. They're mostly made of solid red oak, except for the sides. Those are particle board, unfortunately covered not with real veneer, but with a paper film that has a printed forward grain. The top looks like it's a thick, heavy piece of wood, but it's not. There's a thicker frame around it, and in the center is still solid wood, just much thinner. And yes, they're orange and proud of it, because that color was trendy back then. Not anymore, and we are going to change that because the client wants them to look like white oak. I started by removing the old finish, and I'm using a chemical stripper. This one so far is my favorite one. You can find it at Home Depot. Just make sure that it says heavy duty on the label because there is a different type from the same brand, but it doesn't work as well as this one. The stripper is pretty stinky, so you want to wear a respirator, and it's better to work in a well ventilated area. And while I'm stripping here, I want to apologize in advance. When I was working on the nightstands and filming, at one point my camera decided to format the SD card. I'm not exactly sure if it was the memory card or the camera acting up, but suddenly they just couldn't work together. I had to confirm the formatting and I tried to recover the videos later. I was able to get some of them back, but many were broken and couldn't be recovered. Sorry, there will be some missing footage, but I'll walk you through it. And also, I want to apologize to those of you who don't like my voice, the way I speak, how much I talk, the way I look, the way I dress, you name it. Sorry, I guess I'm not a slice of pizza and I can't make everyone happy, but that's okay. You can just skip this video. The next step was sanding, and I started with 120 grit sandpaper. When the furniture is in a good shape, it's not always necessarily to start with 120, 180 or even 220 can be enough. I went with a lower grit because there was still some toner that had penetrated the wood grain, and I wanted to take off the top layer of wood. Once I was done with 120, I finished sanding with 180 grit. Once all the wooden surfaces were stripped and sanded with 120 and 180 grit sandpaper, I started transforming red oak into white oak. There are several ways to preserve the lighter tone of the wood, and the most obvious one is the paint wash. When I started refinishing furniture, I think almost everyone was doing whitewash, but with oak it can be tricky because whitewash over red oak can give it a pinkish undertone. The safest way is to use a beige wash or a tan wash. In my case, I used a combination of two different paint washes. The first one is beige with a light greenish undertone, and the second one is still beige but more of a peachy beige color. Before applying anything on a piece of furniture, I always test it on a sample, and that's exactly what I did. I tried different paint washes and combinations, and this particular combo was the one the client liked best. For anyone who's new to furniture refinishing, a paint wash is just paint diluted with water. The ratio can vary. 1 part water to 1 part paint usually works well, but it's not set in stone. I personally test everything on a sample first. And often I add more water and go with 2 parts paint and 3 parts water. But I never add more paint because it just dries faster. Here in Alberta, we have pretty dry air, and sometimes when I'm working on a larger surface, I don't even have enough time to wipe off 1-to-1 mix before it starts drying on me. So I'd rather dilute the paint more and apply 2 coats than risk the paint wash drying too fast. Because in that case, I have to sand everything off and start all over again. And that, my friends, concludes today's lecture on paint washes. As a top coat, I used hard wax oil and I applied it once the paint wash was dry. There's one more thing I forgot to mention about the paint wash. If you do samples to pick the color you like, don't forget to apply the same top coat you plan to use on your piece to the sample, because as you might notice, the color changes while I'm applying the oil. And here's the part where some footage is missing. It's about the sides of the dresser. The client and I agreed that I would paint them, and I did, and I used the beige color that is close to the color of the wood. The last step is to attach the hardware my client picked. I think it's beautiful and it fits these nightstands perfectly. And we're done here. Let me remind you how these nightstands looked before. Orange and proud. And here is the after. As always, thank you so much for watching, for your comments, for your likes. That means a world to me. Enjoy the final result and see you in my next video.